What's up, guys? This is Eric from Gun Gamers, and I am here today to talk to you about keeping these running when you are out in the airsoft field. And by these, I mean airsoft AEGs or automatic electric guns. If you're relatively new to airsoft or you're not familiar with airsoft, first I'm just going to explain the core tenet of how these things work so that you can have some idea of exactly what steps of a process need to happen in order to make sure that this thing runs. Now, with an airsoft AEG, you plug a battery into a connector and store that battery somewhere in or on the gun, and then you take your trigger, you pull your trigger, and your gun cycles. Your gun cycles because current is sent through a completed circuit that was completed through your trigger switch, or if you're using a MOSFET, then your signal was completed or sent to your motor in order to run the gun. And when that signal gets sent, current runs through the wire harness, runs through the motor, turns the pinion gear to turn the gears in the gearbox to pull back a piston in order to send that piston forward after gathering air in the cylinder and picking up a BB from the magazine in the hop-up chamber. That air forces the BB out of the hop-up chamber, through the hop-up bucking, and then out the barrel. That is the core gist of your basic AEG. Obviously, there's all kinds of variations on this system, but most normal airsoft guns, in the M4, AK, G36 variety, that's pretty much how they work. So these things are great because as long as the battery is charged and the gun is functioning properly, they are generally very reliable. These things are not so great when they don't work because unless you kind of know what you're looking at, they can be intimidating to troubleshoot and difficult to fix. But if you know what you're looking at, it becomes a lot easier. So hopefully this guide on some of the most common failures that we see will help you not only to keep these running and know what to look out for, but also help you to be able to fix it in the field so you don't wind up having to, leave Milsim West because your motor height was off. Matter of fact, that's a good place to start. One of the most common sources of AEG failure that we see is motor height adjustment. Now, on something like this VFC Avalon SOP mod, there is a screw on the bottom of the pistol grip, and that screw actually tensions the motor into the gearbox. And how high that motor sits matters. If it's sitting too high, it's going to be grindy, it's going to potentially seize up, and it's going to cause problems. If it's too low, it's going to be partially engaged, and then it might strip your pinion gear, it might disengage, and then just start slipping entirely, and then you have a gun that just doesn't shoot. So too high, too low, gun no make working noises. How do you know if it's too high or too low? If the motor height is too high, you're likely to get a dead trigger. And that's where you pull the trigger, nothing happens. If the motor height is too low, you're likely to get a grinding noise from the gearbox, that whee type of sound. So you want to adjust your motor height until your gun is cycling successfully with very little in the way of whine. That is going to be how you know exactly where your motor should be, and that's about the best way there is to do it for most uses. Obviously, some techs are going to have their tricks of how they get their motor height exactly perfect, and something with a motor cage is much easier to do that on. But on something with the motor and the grip, that's how it's done. Now, as I previously alluded to, there are some guns that do not have the motor height screw on the bottom of the pistol grip. On something like this Cyma AKMS, that bottom grip screw is actually to hold the grip onto the motor cage. There's a cage in here, the motor sits in that, and the motor height is actually set by that cage. Now, you can shim that motor height in there, there's sometimes screws in there, but generally speaking, the advantage of a motor cage type of system is that motor height is not very often an issue. And then you have something like this A&K PKM. And on an A&K PKM or other LMG type airsoft replicas, you're actually going to have no motor in the grip. You're going to have the motor contained within the gearbox itself. And actually getting to that motor height is going to require removing the gearbox from the body. On something like this PKM, that's a very easy process with just a few screws that are holding the gearbox in, and If you can just figure out that disassembly process, you can get to the screw on the back of the gearbox and adjust your motor height accordingly. If you have something more complicated to disassemble, I highly recommend Loctiting your motor height screw. And to be frank, I recommend Loctiting your motor height screw on all of your guns. Next up, we have another motor-related issue, actually. So this is going to be when a contact slips off of your motor. So if you have never used an AEG or disassembled one before, hopefully you'll be able to see on the video I'm scrolling up. Generally speaking, airsoft motors are connected to the rest of the circuit by one crimp that goes onto a tang that sticks off of one end of the motor, and the other crimp that sticks onto the corresponding tang on the other end of the motor. So that flows current through the motor, makes the motor turns, gearbox turns, whole thing works. Obviously, if that circuit is broken by one of the motor connectors coming undone, then that means your gun is not going to work. So this is another one that's very simple to diagnose, but you would be shocked the number of times that we have actually run into people who say, hey, my trigger has gone dead and my gun isn't working and nothing is happening, but I'm not sure what's wrong with it. Well, step number one is going to be to take off your motor base plate. So if you have something like an M4 platform, that's going to be right on the bottom with these two screws here. So when you take those two screws off, you're going to see the wires leading to the motor and the connectors. If one of those connectors isn't on the motor, then you know that your motor connector needs to be reset. I recommend crimping that little motor connector with a pair of pliers to give it a little bit more of a secure fit, and then just slide it back on, put your motor base plate back on, and then test your gun. If it all works, then you're done. Obviously, once again, every gun is going to have their own disassembly process in order to reach those motor connectors, and some guns are more likely to have those motor connectors slipped than others. This is generally an issue on AR platform or similar platforms that have the motor connectors just sitting on those contacts in an area where the motor can move up and down, even though it's tensioned with that screw that keeps it into the gearbox. So hopefully, now that you know what motor connectors are and how they work and what they do, and the fact that a dead trigger is a symptom of a motor connector, you'll be able to diagnose if that's an issue, or at least add it to your list of troubleshooting when you're trying to figure out why exactly your gun isn't working. Another thing that can cause dead trigger, because it once again breaks the circuit of the gun cycling, is going to be your fuse. Not all airsoft guns have fuses, but airsoft guns that do have fuses, this tends to be the first thing that you'll want to check. So if you have an airsoft gun that has a fuse, check your fuse before you do anything else to it. So with something like this Crytac TR47, there is a fuse in the stock near where the gun connects the battery to the rest of the circuit. That fuse, as you can see, has a little bit of a metal piece that runs through it, and as long as that metal piece is intact and not burned out, you are good to go. If that fuse is burned out, then that means you either need to replace that fuse, or, and I recommend this in some cases, but not all cases, you're gonna have to use your best judgment, you can also bypass that fuse. Now, bypassing the fuse is simply going to involve taking that little wire that runs from each end, clipping off the fuse connector, and then twisting that wire together, and I recommend soldering it as a permanent solution, or you could always just leave it twisted and cover it with electrical tape if you're in the field and need to bypass a fuse immediately. This is definitely an emergency type of solution, and it's not something that I recommend you try with the battery connected. So be sure to disconnect your battery before doing anything with your fuse. Next up, we're going to talk about perhaps the most frustrating issue that you can have, and that's where your gun is still cycling, but it's not feeding. Now, feeding issues can often be attributed to something in the gearbox, but before you go opening up your gearbox, there are a couple of checks that you'll want to perform first. First, if your gun stops feeding, remove the magazine, and to be honest, just check if there's ammo. If there's not ammo in the magazine, then obviously there's your first problem. But if there is ammo in the magazine, then it might be that you're getting some type of jam. So that's where you might want to check if your magazine is functioning by putting it in again and trying to shoot. If BBs are still not coming out, then you remove the magazine again, and if there is ammo right at the top of the feeding tube, then it's possible that you have something bigger as an issue. But if there's BBs that are sitting down inside a little bit, or the BBs seem rattly or loose, you may have a jam. Now, Airsoft magazines can jam when Airsoft BBs go side by side in the little feeding channel that they're supposed to just double stack up into smoothly. And honestly, the best way to get those things to work again and get them to get back out of your magazine, give the magazine a firm hit against something, and 1 or 2 firm hits is usually enough to dislodge a jam. But you may have an issue with your BBs, or you may have an issue with your magazine. I recommend double checking your magazine function before and after games by loading and unloading them and making sure that they load and unload smoothly. If you're having consistent jams, then you may want to consider replacing your followers or your springs. If the magazine is not the reason for the jam that you're experiencing, then there are a couple of common causes for that. Number one is going to be something called a pinch jam. A pinch jam is when an Airsoft BB gets stuck in the hop-up unit because the hop-up bucking has trapped the BB in there with too much pressure, or a piece of the bucking has gotten caught as the BB tried to move through. That makes the BB stuck there with nowhere to go, and that results in the air nozzle and the piston moving back and forth, cycling, doing everything they're supposed to do, but they can't get that BB out of there. You will recognize a pinch jam most immediately by shooting over and over and over again, but all you hear is a dull thump from the cycling of your gearbox and nothing comes out of the magwell. You may even start to get piston pre-engagement. I highly recommend that you stop shooting if you suspect that you actually have BBs jammed in your hop-up unit or in your inner barrel. The easiest way to prevent a pinch jam or something like it is to keep your barrel and hop-up clean them regularly, and to make sure that you keep your bucking in good condition, A, by using a hop-up bucking that fits well with your given hop-up unit, and B, by making sure that you don't run it into the ground to the point that it actually breaks or tears, because a torn hop-up bucking can be a major cause of these types of jams. As for rectifying this type of jam in the field, well, you may need to bring an extra hop-up bucking with you into the field in order to do this kind of fix, or what you may want to do is just use an unjamming rod, jam it down the barrel, and see if you can clear that BB out of there. Or if you really have to, you might even be able to disassemble your hop-up in the field and then reassemble it, ensuring that you have proper function. Obviously, disassembling and reassembling a hop-up is going to take some know-how, so if you're not super familiar with it, honestly, check if somebody near you is more used to fixing guns than you are. They might be able to help you out. And finally, one of the most common failures that I see that frustrates people more than anything else is that they get onto the field and they realize they have no hop-up. Step number one, obviously, ensure that you know where your hop-up is and you know which direction is on and which direction is off. If you think you're turning your hop-up up, and up, and no hop is being applied, try turning it the other way, and maybe turning it the other way is actually the correct way to go. You know, obviously, there's no shame in admitting that you were wrong if you got it wrong. If no matter how you try to adjust your hop-up unit, you just can't get any hop onto your BBs, another thing to try is actually taking the hop-up unit out of the airsoft gun and looking through it in order to make sure that when you turn the dial to make the hop-up go up and down, you're actually getting motion in the hop-up mound to the top, from the top to the bottom in the unit. Now, one of the things that I have seen very commonly with airsoft hop-ups is upside down barrels. You'd be shocked how common of a mistake this is, and it's an easy one to make. So ensure that the window for your hop-up nub that actually puts backspin on the BB is centered in the top of your hop-up unit. You will know if you have any kind of issues, once again, if you're adjusting your hop-up and you see that you are not getting downward pressure on the mound in order to put backspin on the BB. So anyway, that is my quick and dirty guide to a few of the most common airsoft malfunctions that we see on the field and how you can fix them. Obviously, every airsoft gun is its own special, unique snowflake, and they're all going to have their own types of failures and quirks that you might need to learn. But if you're using a standard AK or AR platform, or even something that's like this light machine gun, these fixes should be actionable in one way or another, and hopefully you'll be able to prevent them with some of the tips that we've given you in this video. So if you have any suggestions for other malfunctions that you've seen or other things that could use a video guide on how to fix them, then please leave those in the comments. And if you have advice to prevent or rectify any of these issues that we didn't cover in the video, leave that in the comments too. And if you just want to tell me that my garage is ugly, that can also go in the comments. Thank you for watching. This has been Eric from Gun Gamers. I hope you found this helpful and entertaining, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace. Thank you for watching this video from Gun Gamers. We hope you enjoyed watching it as much as we enjoyed making it. Check the description below if you'd like to buy a t-shirt or a patch, and use the coupon code JUDY10 for 10% off of your next order at Amped Airsoft. Thank you again for watching, and praise Judy.